Now that you know that at the end of step 4, we're trying to straighten that anchor so that it's 180 degrees, I'm going to show you some of the main causes for having that 90-degree angle in your line. It's actually called the bloody L. So after we've swept from step 3, and after we're completing that circle up of step 4, our line in the water in front of us should no longer have that 90-degree angle. Your line shouldn't have it, your sink tip shouldn't have it, your leader shouldn't have it, even your fly shouldn't have it. So yes, that means if you're casting enormous flies, you are going to have to make sure that they also pop 180 degrees. From here, that's going to align us to go into step 5. It's going to have us align from our feet to our shoulder, to our hand, our rod tip, and obviously our fly line. If you have that 90-degree angle or that bloody L, you're going to be fighting water resistance, and we want to make this as easy as possible. Let's talk about some of the most common errors that cause a bloody L. 1. Setting my anchor too far downstream. If my anchor is too far downstream, as I come to sweep around, my anchor will still be too far away from me, and of course, I'm going to create that 90-degree angle and cause a bloody L. I'll show you what that looks like in real time. Bloody L. I can fix that by bringing my anchor closer to me, by bringing my rod tip further to my left. The second reason for a bloody L is sweeping too slow. I'll show you what that looks like. Bloody L. When we sweep too slow, the end of our line and our flies start to sink, and it's just inevitable that by the time we make it up into our D loop or at the end of step 4, we just can't get that line to pop and straighten, so we end up with a bloody L. The next error is if you dip while you're sweeping. I'll show you what I mean. Danger, danger. Remember, the rule is once you go up, you may never go down. So even though you think that your rod is constantly climbing upwards, if your shoulder is dropping, it's inevitably forcing your rod tip down as well. Scary stuff. The next error comes back to when I was speaking about cutting your corners. You'll notice that my rod tip draws an L. Bloody L. If you do that same error with your rod tip, even worse than a bloody L, you can end up popping your fly and anchor entirely out of the water, and then it's actually a hazard for anyone who may be walking behind you. I should make mention that if you sweep too fast, you may also end up popping your anchor. It looks like this. Now that we know what the bloody L is, now that we know what the drift is and when and how much of it to apply, we need to speak about the creep. Yes, there are creeps in this sport. I'll tell you all about it. The creep exists in both single-hand false casting as well as spey casting. I'm going to explain how it applies to your spey cast. Remember, one of the most important things that you need to know about the spey cast is that we're trying to keep the rod under constant tension. If you remember correctly, we were speaking earlier about step 4 and how we're going to round it in that D, circling back and up. The back and up motion here is called a drift, not to be confused with the creep, which is the opposite. A creep is never good in any casting, whether it be your single hand cast or your spey cast. The creep looks like this. You'll notice that my rod tip comes back, creeps forward, and then proceeds to deliver. A number of things happen here. When you creep, you end up losing your constant tension. Your rod tip goes from flexed to unflexed to flexed again. This causes you to draw a concaving rod tip path. A concaving rod tip path creates a tailing loop. And even though we call those tailing loop knots wind knots, we all know what they really are. There are two kinds of creeps. There are subtle creeps and there are obvious creeps. I'm going to show you what they both look like. An obvious creep looks like this. The rod juts forward and then proceeds to come forward into forward delivery. The subtle creep is a little bit harder to diagnose. It looks like this. When you creep, you change your trajectory. So think about it this way, as if you're trying to throw a baseball. If you want a ball to go far, do you start your throw here or do you start your throw here? Hopefully you start your throw here. When you drift, you can drift back into that nice long stroke. If you start your throw or your cast here with a steep trajectory, you really have no choice but to either throw or cast down into the water or try to swerve up, which of course creates a concaving path and those wind knots. Another analogy is a bow and arrow. If you go to shoot a bow and you're on full draw and then you let go of some of that tension and release, your arrow's not going to go very far. However, if you either maintain that tension and or pull back on that tension, you're going to be able to have all of this beautiful stored energy and your arrow is going to fly. Remember, we're only focusing on step 4 of 5 right now. So I'll lead it up from step 3, but I'm going to refrain from going into step 5, which is of course our forward delivery. Pay special attention to my hands and obviously my rod tip. They work together. Notice that I'm going around on a constant circular motion whilst lifting up and back, ultimately aligning my hands to come forward into step 5, which is a straight line path into our final delivery. I'm going to do step 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to do step 4 over and over and over again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 4, 4. There are a number of things that cause a creep. Here are just a few of them. One of the causes of creep is by having too much acceleration. Think about it this way. You're driving a car, you slam your foot on the gas, and then you take your foot off right away. Everybody jolts forward. Whereas, if you just gradually put your foot on the accelerator and then gradually take it off, everyone's smooth and controlled. It's the same thing with casting. Another cause of creep and or having too steep of a trajectory is when you have your shoulders hunched forward, or for the casters who lead with their head. I find that even when I'm out there and I'm getting cold, my shoulders inevitably crunch forward and I have a hard time drifting back and opening my stroke where I need it to be. It looks like this. Too steep. Too steep. If you're an experienced caster, you may be catching something else that I'm doing. If you are one of those casters who prefers to cast cack-handed, meaning your right hand over your left shoulder, you will also inevitably face a time where you can no longer drift where you need to be because that blasted left shoulder gets in your way and will prevent you from drifting back and up where you need to be. I strongly suggest, and I am taking my own advice, on learning how to cast with your left hand up as well as your right hand up. As I mentioned earlier when we were speaking about creep and high trajectory, we really want to make sure that we're not creating our D-loop with everything in front of our face. Remember, we want to be at home position. Just think about one of those old phones that used to go on the wall. You pick it up, hello, goodbye. Except you want to imagine that it's your mother-in-law calling and she's screaming at you, so you're holding it slightly out to the side. Hello, goodbye. Most of us don't answer the phone here. Hello, goodbye. So again, bring it to home position. If we just bring everything in and relax our shoulders, we're back into home position. If you find that you're a relatively rigid caster, a really good trick is to just simply breathe in, and when you breathe out, take twice as long to breathe out and just let everything relax as they would if you were totally calm at a yoga class.